Deep in the heart of a forgotten town where shadows linger longer than daylight, there stands a massive, crumbling building surrounded by rusted iron gates and overgrown weeds. A place locals whisper about but never dare to enter. The abandoned hospital where, according to countless stories, patients still scream at night. Its walls are cracked, its windows shattered, yet an eerie presence seems to breathe through every broken corridor, pulling curious souls closer, daring them to discover its dreadful past. The hospital had once been the pride of the town, a medical center that promised healing, hope, and life. But decades ago, a mysterious fire broke out in the West Wing, trapping dozens of patients inside while doctors and nurses struggled helplessly. Many perished, their final cries echoing through the halls. And though the fire was eventually extinguished, the hospital never reopened, instead left as a shell of grief, abandonment, and secrets. Over the years, brave explorers and thrill seekers crept inside, armed with flashlights and shaky cameras, only to emerge pale-faced, whispering of phantom screams, shadowy figures, and cold touches that seemed to follow them out into the night. Some never returned at all, swallowed by the black void of the hospital's forgotten wards. The legend grew stronger with every passing decade. The hospital was cursed, its halls haunted by restless spirits of patients who suffered agonizing deaths, calling out for help that would never come. It is here that our story begins, with a young traveler named Daniel, who had heard the rumors while passing through the town and, unlike the locals, could not resist the magnetic pull of the unknown. A writer by profession and seeker of dark tales, Daniel was convinced that the hospital would be the perfect backdrop for his next story, one that would blend truth with horror and captivate readers around the world. On a foggy evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and a sickly yellow moon rose, Daniel approached the towering hospital gates with his backpack, camera, and recorder. The air was thick with decay, carrying the metallic stench of rust mixed with something sour, like blood that had been left to rot for decades. The gate groaned open as if resisting his entry, yet he stepped inside, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Each step he took on the cracked pathway was accompanied by the crunch of dead leaves and the low whisper of the wind that seemed to carry voices, faint, pleading, mournful. The front doors of the hospital loomed ahead, half broken and covered in graffiti. But what unsettled Daniel most was the handprints, charred black handprints smeared across the walls as if people had clawed desperately trying to escape the inferno that claimed their lives. He raised his camera, capturing the image, though when he looked back through the lens, he swore he saw the faint outline of a face staring at him from the window above, a hollow-eyed figure that disappeared when he lowered the camera. Inside, the air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the silence pressed against his ears until it was broken by a faint sound, a distant, muffled scream so real that Daniel froze in place. It was impossible, he told himself. The hospital had been abandoned for over 40 years. Still, the sound continued, faint but insistent, as if someone was trapped deep within the building. He turned on his recorder, whispering into it, "I've just entered the hospital. It's colder than outside, unnaturally cold, and I hear something. Screams, far away. I know it sounds impossible, but I can't deny what I'm hearing." His voice trembled, yet curiosity drove him forward. As he walked deeper, his flashlight flickered across walls lined with peeling paint and rusted medical charts, the remnants of a once bustling place of healing now turned into a mausoleum of despair. A broken wheelchair lay toppled in the hallway, its wheels squeaking faintly, though no one touched it. Daniel's breath quickened as he pushed it aside, but when he glanced behind him, the wheelchair had rolled back to its original spot, as if unseen hands had returned it. The screams grew louder, rising and falling like waves of agony, echoing from every direction until Daniel could no longer tell where they came from. He stumbled into what once had been the emergency ward, where rusted hospital beds were lined against the walls, their mattresses burned and blackened. A single surgical light hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. He raised his flashlight toward it, and in that moment, the faintest sound of sobbing filled the room. His camera clicked, capturing the scene, but when the flash illuminated the ward, he caught a glimpse of something horrifying. A dozen figures, charred and skeletal, standing at the foot of the beds, their mouths open wide in eternal screams, eyes hollow pits of despair. He blinked, and they were gone. His heart raced, sweat forming despite the icy chill, and he whispered again into the recorder, "They're here. I don't know how, but they're still here. The patients, their souls, trapped, screaming." Daniel pressed deeper, drawn by an unseen force that seemed to beckon him further into the hospital's darkest corners. Every hallway stretched endlessly, and the architecture itself seemed to twist unnaturally, leaving him in circles until he realized the hospital wanted him lost. He heard whispers now, not just screams, voices calling his name, pleading, "Help us, don't leave us, we're still burning." His flashlight flickered violently, plunging him into moments of darkness where the whispers grew closer, louder, almost inside his head. He stumbled into the operating theater, a massive room with shattered glass and overturned equipment. In the center, an old operating table stood, stained dark with something long since dried. The temperature dropped further until his breath fogged in front of him, and then he saw it. Straps still fastened to the table, as if someone had been restrained, forced to endure unspeakable pain. The recorder caught his trembling words. They didn't just die in the fire. Something else happened here. Experiments. Torture. This wasn't a hospital, it was a prison. As if to confirm his realization, the overhead surgical light blazed suddenly to life, flooding the room with a harsh white glow. And in that light, Daniel saw them. The patients, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies half burned, surrounding him in silence, before unleashing a collective scream so deafening that it rattled the glass and made his ears bleed. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, begging them to stop, but the scream only grew louder, until suddenly, as quickly as it began, it ceased. The light flickered and died, leaving him in suffocating darkness. Shaken but determined, Daniel rose, wiping blood from his ears, and whispered, "If their screams are still here, their story needs to be told. I can't leave until I uncover the truth." He pushed deeper into the hospital, unaware that with every step, the building was closing around him, sealing his fate with the souls that never left.
Daniel's footsteps echoed against the hollow floors as he descended deeper into the abandoned hospital, each sound swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed, broken only by faint whispers that seemed to seep from the very walls themselves. The deeper he went, the stronger the pull, as though unseen hands guided him toward the hospital's buried secrets, secrets the world had long tried to forget. The air thickened with the smell of rot and mildew, mixed with something acrid, as if smoke still lingered decades after the fire, and each breath Daniel took seemed heavier, as though it belonged to someone else's lungs. His flashlight swept across decayed rooms where shattered medicine bottles glittered like broken glass under the pale beam. IV bags hung deflated from rusted hooks, and forgotten files lay scattered on the ground, their papers smeared with ash and dark stains resembling dried blood. He bent to pick one up. A patient record dated just days before the fire, and the faded photograph of a gaunt woman stared back at him with hollow eyes. Scribbled across the page in frantic handwriting were the words, "Don't let them take me again." Daniel shivered, his fingers trembling as he placed the file back down, whispering into his recorder. The patients knew something was happening to them. This wasn't just a fire accident. This was a cover-up. The corridor ahead stretched endlessly, lined with doors that seemed to breathe, their frames warped, as though the building itself was alive and watching him. He reached the psychiatric ward, its entrance marked by a rusted sign that swayed gently, though no wind stirred, and as he stepped through, the screams began again, long, drawn-out wails that rose and fell like the cries of tortured souls. The sound clawed at his sanity, but his curiosity chained him tighter than fear ever could. He entered a cell-like room, its walls potted with torn leather that had been clawed open, revealing stuffing that spilled out like entrails. Scratches gouged into the walls spelled out a single word, repeated over and over, "Burn." As Daniel traced the letters with his flashlight, his ears caught something different this time. A child's voice, soft, broken, whispering, They never let me leave. The sound came from the corner where shadows bled into each other, and when Daniel turned his light, he froze. There sat a small figure, knees drawn to chest, its face hidden beneath tangled hair. For a moment it seemed real, flesh and blood, but when the light fully revealed it, the figure raised its head to show a face half-burned, teeth exposed in a scream that never ended. Daniel stumbled backwards, his heart hammering, but the child dissolved into smoke, leaving behind only the echo of its final scream. He whispered shakily into his recorder, "There were children here, not just patients. They experimented on children." The psychiatric wing seemed endless, its walls closing in, and Daniel felt the heavy weight of unseen eyes boring into his back. As he pressed forward, the whispers became clearer, words forming sentences, voices overlapping in a chorus of agony. "We trusted them. They betrayed us. Help us. Free us." He passed door after door, each revealing snapshots of torment. An examination room with rusted restraints bolted to the floor, a treatment chair stained dark, and jars of preserved organs sitting untouched on shelves, their lids sealed though the glass was fogged as if they breathed inside. The deeper he went, the more the temperature dropped, until frost began to creep along the edges of the walls, glistening like spiderwebs under his light. His breath puffed visibly in front of him, and his body trembled with both cold and fear, but still he pressed onward. He entered a large chamber, the heart of the psychiatric wing, and his flashlight revealed a circle of beds arranged unnaturally, their mattresses burned, metal frames warped by heat. In the center lay a massive iron wheel, its purpose unclear, but when Daniel approached, he realized it was some sort of experimental device, wires trailing from it like veins, designed to strap multiple patients at once. His stomach churned as the recorder captured his horrified whisper. This wasn't healing. This was torture disguised as medicine. Suddenly, the silence shattered with a sound so piercing, it sent Daniel to his knees. Screams erupting from every bed at once, though empty, rising in perfect unison, shaking the very walls around him. His flashlight burst and went out, plunging him into darkness, but the screams continued, circling him closer and closer until he could feel cold breath against his neck. He fumbled with his backpack, pulling out a backup flashlight, and when the beam cut through the black, he wished it hadn't. Around him stood dozens of figures, their bodies charred and broken, their hospital gowns hanging in tatters, their mouths wide open in screams, though no words emerged, just raw agony. Their hollow eyes fixed on him, accusing, desperate, pleading. Daniel backed against the wall, shaking violently, but the figures didn't move closer. They only pointed. Every skeletal finger aims at a door at the far end of the chamber, a door darker than the shadows as though it absorbed all light. His recorder picked up his panicked whisper. "They're showing me something. They want me to go there." Gathering every ounce of courage he had left, Daniel stumbled across the room, his feet crunching on shards of broken glass, and pushed open the heavy door. What lay beyond made his blood run cold. He had entered the basement morgue, the place where the hospital stored its dead, and though decades had passed, the stench of rot was overwhelming. Rows of cold metal drawers lined the walls, some still sealed, others pried open, revealing skeletal remains inside. His flashlight trembled across the room until it landed on an operating slab in the center, where the blackened outline of a body was scorched into the metal, as though someone had burned alive upon it. The whispers surged again, louder, overlapping, until Daniel could no longer distinguish them. Pleas for help, cries of pain, accusations of betrayal. The walls seemed to drip with dark stains, and the ceiling groaned above, as if the building itself was alive and grieving. And then from the far corner came movement. Daniel swung his flashlight and froze. A figure stood there, taller than any patient he'd seen, dressed not in a gown but in a charred doctor's coat, its face obscured by melted flesh and shadow, its eyes burning with an otherworldly glow. The screams stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so suffocating that it pressed against Daniel's chest, stealing his breath. The figure raised one blackened hand and pointed at him, a gesture of both accusation and warning. Daniel felt his legs lock, his voice caught in his throat until the figure spoke, its voice a guttural growl that shook the walls. "You shouldn't have come here." Daniel staggered back, his recorder clattering to the ground, capturing every sound as the figure stepped forward, dragging chains that clinked against the floor. The air grew hotter, smoke curling up from the floorboards as if the fire had reignited, and the walls flickered with visions. Patients strapped to tables, children screaming, doctors looming above with instruments not meant to heal but to mutilate. Daniel screamed, covering his ears, but the visions burned themselves into his mind. The figure of the doctor loomed closer, his face now clearer, half melted, half skeletal, his eyes glowing coals of hatred and pain. "They still scream because of me," he hissed, his voice layered with the cries of countless souls. "And now you will too." The chains rattled louder, the morgue door slammed shut, and Daniel realized the truth. He wasn't just uncovering the hospital story, he was becoming part of it. The morgue's suffocating darkness seemed to close in on Daniel as the charred doctor's figure advanced, each dragging step sending sparks from the chains that bound him. And though every instinct screamed at Daniel to run, his body felt paralyzed, as though the very air had turned to stone. His chest heaved, his breath ragged, his flashlight trembling wildly in his grip, as the doctor's molten eyes bored into him, promising nothing but torment. The recorder lay on the floor, still running, capturing the haunting silence between them. And in that silence, Daniel realized something horrifying. The building itself had trapped him, its walls sealing, its doors vanishing, its very foundation reshaping to ensure he would never leave, just as the patients had never left. The doctor raised his blackened hand again, and the morgue erupted with sound, drawers slamming open violently as skeletal remains spilled out, jaws falling agape as though joining in the eternal screams, their bones rattling against the floor in an awful chorus. Daniel stumbled backward, the beam of his light catching the doctor's burned face in full, half bone, half melted flesh, his lips twisted into something that might have once been a smile, but now was a grotesque mask of hatred. "You hear them, don't you?" the doctor rasped, his voice layered with countless other voices, as though the very patients spoke through him. "They scream because I made them scream. They scream because no one came to save them. They scream, and now you will scream too." His words cut into Daniel's skull like knives, and in that moment, Daniel realized he wasn't simply dealing with restless souls, but with a malevolent presence, the doctor himself, or what remained of him, a spirit corrupted by guilt, rage, and the agony of those he had tormented. Summoning every ounce of willpower, Daniel forced his legs to move, sprinting toward the far exit of the morgue, his footsteps echoing as bones cracked beneath him. Behind him, the chains clanged violently, dragging across the floor as the doctor pursued with inhuman speed. The walls warped, the ceiling groaned, and flames licked at the edges of the room, as though the fire of decades past had been reignited, consuming everything in its path. Daniel burst through the morgue door, slamming it shut, though he knew such barriers meant little in a place ruled by the dead. He stumbled down a narrow hallway, his flashlight beam cutting jagged shapes across the walls, when suddenly the lights above flickered to life for the first time in 40 years, bathing the corridor in a sickly, flickering glow. He realized he was back near the main ward, yet the place had changed, no longer abandoned, but alive. Nurses in white uniforms hurried past him, their faces blurred and pale, their movements jerky, mechanical, as though puppets on strings. Patients lay strapped to gurneys, their bodies twitching, their mouths moving in silent screams, eyes bulging with terror. Daniel froze, watching the scene unfold like a nightmare replaying itself, a time loop dragging him into the hospital's darkest day. He whispered shakily into his recorder, "It's happening again. The night of the fire. They're showing me everything." As he stumbled through the ward, the walls pulsed with heat, smoke curling from the cracks, and patients began to thrash violently against their restraints. A nurse turned to face him suddenly, her features melting away to reveal a charred skull beneath, and with a blood-curdling scream she lunged at him, vanishing into ash just before she reached him. Daniel stumbled back, his flashlight flickering again, his pulse racing so violently it drowned out the whispers.
But then he heard it. One voice, clear above the chaos, a woman's voice calling his name. Daniel. Daniel. It came from the far corner of the ward, where a figure stood cloaked in shadow. He raised his flashlight, revealing a woman in a burned hospital gown, her face half scorched, yet somehow still retaining fragments of beauty, her eyes filled with sorrow rather than rage. She raised a trembling hand toward him. Please, you must help us. We are trapped, not just by death, but by him. She pointed toward the shadows behind her, where the charred doctor's figure loomed once more, his molten eyes burning brighter than before. He feeds on our screams, she whispered, her voice breaking. Every cry gives him strength. Every tear binds us tighter. Unless someone carries our story, unless someone tells the truth, we will never be free. Daniel's mind raced. Was this why he was drawn here? Not just to witness, but to release them? He felt his fear shift into something sharper, a determination, a purpose. But before he could speak, the doctor's voice thundered through the ward, rattling the very floor. They belong to me. Their screams are mine, their suffering eternal, and you, fool, will join them. The flames erupted fully now, engulfing the beds, swallowing the patients, their screams rising to unbearable heights. Daniel clutched his head, pain splitting through his skull, but he forced his eyes open, locking them on the sorrowful woman. She mouthed one word: run. Without hesitation, Daniel bolted, weaving through the chaos as spectral nurses and burning patients reached out for him, their hands clawing desperately not to harm him, but to hold him back, as though warning him of what awaited beyond. He pushed through, bursting into another corridor, the air thick with smoke, the floor beneath him trembling with each step, as though the building itself wanted to collapse and bury him alive. He stumbled into the children's ward, a place he had prayed he wouldn't find, for the whispers of children had haunted him since he first entered. The room was filled with tiny beds, their frames blackened, toys melted into grotesque shapes, teddy bears with burned faces staring blindly from the floor. The cries of children filled the air, high-pitched, piercing, impossible to bear. Daniel's knees buckled, tears stinging his eyes as he whispered into his recorder, God, the children, their screams are the worst. It's unbearable. They never even had a chance. From the corner, a small rocking horse moved on its own, creaking back and forth, and upon it sat a shadow of a child, faceless, pointing toward the far wall. Daniel followed the gesture. His flashlight revealed a mural, faded but still visible. Paintings of smiling children holding balloons, doctors with stethoscopes, and sunshine pouring through windows. But the mural had been defaced, charred handprints smeared across it, and scrawled in ash were the words, "We burn, we scream, we stay." Suddenly the rocking horse toppled over, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and the children's screams intensified, shaking the very windows until they shattered inward. Tiny figures began to emerge from the shadows, their burned forms crawling across the floor, reaching for Daniel with hands that glowed faintly with embers. He stumbled backward, tripping over a bed frame, and his flashlight clattered away, leaving him in flickering half-darkness. The children surrounded him, their faces twisted in agony, yet when they touched him, he felt no pain, only sorrow, deep, unending sorrow that pierced his heart. They weren't trying to harm him. They were begging for release. Daniel, sobbing, whispered, "I hear you. I promise. I'll tell your story. I'll set you free." The children's screams softened, fading into faint whispers, and one by one they dissolved into smoke, vanishing into the ceiling vents. For a moment, peace returned to the ward. But peace never lasted in this hospital. From the doorway came a roar, deeper than thunder, and the doctor's charred figure appeared again, chains whipping across the floor like serpents. "Lies! You cannot free them. Their screams are mine forever, and so is yours." Flames erupted fully now, engulfing the beds. The mural ignited,
and the doctor raised his hand, sending the chains flying toward Daniel like venomous whips. Daniel dove for his fallen flashlight, snatching it just as the chains struck the ground where he had been. The impact splintered the floorboards, sending debris flying, and Daniel scrambled out through a side door, sprinting into yet another corridor. The building groaned violently, dust falling from the ceiling, pipes bursting and spewing steam. Daniel realized with dawning horror that the hospital wasn't just haunted, it was alive, reshaping itself, ensuring he would never escape. But somewhere within the chaos, he remembered the woman's words: "Carry our story. Tell the truth." And for the first time, he knew his survival wasn't just about him, it was about them, the countless souls still screaming in the night, waiting for someone to finally hear.